Rachel. Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation all about accessibility. Do you just want to start and introduce yourself and who you are at Creative Force?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, Lindsay. Thanks for inviting me along to do this. I'm the product manager at Creative Force, and I manage a lot of the accessibility work. I kind of fell into it by accident. It wasn't something I necessarily sought out, but I've become quite passionate about it now and protective of making sure that we meet all the guidelines that we're meant to. And I suppose that's because we do have a lot of users with disabilities who depend on those improvements that we make. But also, I will probably be one of them one day as we get older. We do lose our sight and our hearing quite often. And it's also, there's also a feel-good factor there, I think. If you feel like you're building something that can work for everybody, it does make you feel good. So it's not just the right thing to do. It is quite a nice thing to do as well. And so I enjoy it. Even though I fell into it by accident, I like having oversight of the accessibility stuff.
Great. Yeah. And, it's really important as a software company that we're providing an experience that, is actually usable. Very generally speaking, what does accessibility mean for a software?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. It's about making the software available to someone who has disabilities so that they can still do everything that a person without that disability can do. And the disability could range from lots of things. I mean, obvious ones are, visual impairments or hearing impairments, but there could also be others that people use. So people who are paralyzed and use special devices to access a screen with their mouth. That as well is considered in the realm of accessibility.
Okay. And the reason why I wanted to talk to you about it today is because it's a very timely thing right now as we're getting prepared for the European Accessibility Act. So can you tell us a little bit about what this is and why is it significant?
Yes, so the European Accessibility Act is a piece of legislation out of the European Union, and it's very talked about right now because it comes into effect on the 28th of June 2025, so next month. It was actually accepted by the European Union in 2019, but takes a while to actually come into effect. And it's about harmonizing all the laws and guidelines across the 27 member states of the EU. So the idea is that they want to make sure that the needs of people with disabilities are met and that they're not discriminated against. But all the member states of the EU will have their own laws currently, but there are disparities between them. And these disparities and inconsistencies create barriers to trade. So the primary focus is about consistency across the EU and reducing those barriers to trade.
Okay, so my next question is who does this apply to? Just the EU, or could it apply to people outside the EU? Is there anyone who's exempt?
Yeah, it is. It applies to everybody who wants to do business with the EU. So obviously companies within the EU doing business with each other, yes, they must comply, but also anyone else across the world who wants to do business with someone in the EU must also comply with the legislation.
Okay.
There are some exemptions. Their micro enterprises are exempt. I think they're defined by number of employees and annual turnover, so very small organizations. If an organization can prove that the burden of compliance would disproportionately affect their ability to operate, then they're also exempt. But mostly everyone has to comply with this, whether you're in the EU or not, if you want to do business with the EU.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know there's already some rules, regulations, compliances already in existence. I know it's kind of like an alphabet soup at times. I know there's WCAG, there's the ADA in the US. How is this different than those existing items?
Yes, so the WCAG that you mentioned, that's Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, that's not legislation. Those are internationally recognized guidelines or criteria for how to make your web content accessible. The ADA, which is US, American Disability Act, it's been around for a long time. That was back in 1990, that one. So you could say it was way ahead of the European Accessibility Act, which is 2019, much more recent. but they're quite different. The American Disability Act was primarily designed not to discriminate against people with disabilities. So, for instance, an employer under the American Discrimination Act would not be allowed to discriminate against an employee who has a disability without, potentially being sued. They have to provide reasonable accommodations first. Whereas the European Accessibility Act is not really about that. It's about trade. So it's about trade, products, and services only. It's not to do with hiring employees. So they've kind of got different focuses, although they are both, the end game is the same in that we don't want to discriminate against people with disabilities. So there is a little bit of overlap. And WCAG, as I said, isn't legislation at all, just guidelines.
So, in terms of our own software and platform, what do we currently offer in terms of accessibility?
Yeah, so we comply with the WCAG guidelines 2.2, AA level, and we also comply with some existing European legislation, the EN 301549, and in the US there's section 508. So this is our level of compliance, and having that WCAG and the EN 301549 and section 508 gives us compliance with the European Accessibility Act as well.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of numbers and a lot of letters there. What does it mean for our clients? Like, what does this, does it make our software more usable? Like, what does it actually mean?
Well, yeah, absolutely. It definitely makes the software more usable. Certainly for people with disabilities, our clients can be reassured that if any of their users have disabilities, that they'll be able to do everything that a person without the disability could do. It also means they're not going to run into any legal issues with the laws in various countries because we meet those requirements. So yes, I think they can be reassured that we comply with these things, and also that it's important to us.
And then how should other companies assess whether their software meets the EAA's requirements?
Yes, so you can get external companies to conduct audits on your software, and someone will come in with specialty knowledge and have a look around and do a full audit and tell you what's wrong, what needs to be fixed. You can also do it yourself. There's something called a VPAT, which stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, and it's basically a very, very long checklist that you need to go through and check, this is what you have to do to comply. Do I meet all these things? And that's very good. I would recommend most companies would at the very least do that. And then in addition to those things, the actual practical assessment or testing, I mean, you can just go through a checklist, but if you actually want to go and have a look at it and try it out, well, you can also get browser tools that can do a quick test of accessibility on the page you're looking at. That's definitely doesn't encompass everything, but it's a good easy way to start. Just let's run this little browser tool and check for missing labels, color contrast. And also, I would definitely say speak to people with disabilities and get feedback.
Yeah, that's really important. Well, what are some common accessibility features that you think some software overlooks? Like I know you just mentioned a few things there, like color contrast, but yeah, are there some common ones that people don't think about?
Yes, color contrast, definitely. That's a big one, and a very easy one to fix too, but quite often overlooked. And although it's very important for people with disabilities, it's important for everyone too. If you think about when you've been looking at a web page on your phone and it's a very bright day and there's a lot of glare, you want that color contrast on your screen. So this is the sort of
Right.
thing that does benefit absolutely everybody to get that right. I would also say making sure web pages are navigable by keyboard. That's often missed because if you're a blind user dependent on a screen reader, you're not going to be able to use your mouse. You need to be able to do everything with the keyboard, and a lot of websites forget about that. Focus indicators, that's also important. If you're navigating with your mouse, it's important to make sure focus is clearly distinguished on the page so you know where the cursor is at that point in time. Making sure links have text. It's quite common to see web pages with icons now that link to places, but then there's no descriptive text to say what it is, so someone with a screen reader won't know.
Mm.
Yeah, those would be, I mean, there's a lot more than that, but those would be very
Yeah.
common ones, and those tend to be quite easy to fix as well.
Yeah. So what tools or processes can you recommend then for people who are wanting to incorporate more accessibility into their, into their website, into their development workflows? And is there anything you don't recommend?
Yeah, so in terms of processes, I probably start with making training, getting
Yeah.
everybody on board with it internally. Because if you just start fixing things and you haven't got the whole company on board, or you haven't done any training, you're going to fix stuff and then just undo that over time as new content gets put out that then introduces new accessibility issues. So it makes it hard to get on top of it if you're constantly fixing all the time. So in terms of processes, that staff training is really important. I would also say there's no quick fix for this. I think
Mm.
if anyone says we can give you this bit of code and it's going to fix all your accessibility issues, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. It is most definitely too good to be true. You can't just add a bit of code and have it fix everything on your website. You really do have to put in the hard work. So one thing I think you can use are those browser tools that I suggested that can
Hmm.
check for everything. You absolutely have to use a screen reader. They come free on all computers now. Every computer has a screen reader you can use, and there are some commercial ones you can purchase as well. But you absolutely need to use a screen reader to test out what it's like. Get used to using a keyboard so you can experience navigating around with a keyboard. So yeah, those would be the main things I'd suggest. And again, I just reiterate, talking to people with disabilities. We have users with disabilities who depend on screen readers, and we've had a lot of feedback from them, and training sessions where we've watched them try and navigate our product with keyboard only, and it's an invaluable lesson. It's the sort of thing you can't replicate.
Right, right. I was just about to say that just going through and using a screen reader on my own in the training that you helped, organize for our whole company was an incredible experience because I had never used it before, and just seeing, like, hearing it going through, and like what made sense and what didn't make sense at all, and how and fixing those things over time was really eye-opening. But then to actually hear from a client, that's a totally different experience because they're going to experience it completely differently than
Yeah.
me. So yeah, it's really important, and it's a good point to make. Are there any examples of really great accessible websites that you would recommend we take a look at, and what makes them so great?
There is some really good ones. The gov.uk website is quite renowned for its accessibility. So it's just gov.uk, and also the NHS one. They're both very simple websites, but they've just done everything perfectly from an accessibility perspective. When you tab around the focus, the buttons, the headings, it's almost as though they've designed it first for accessibility. Really, really
Nice.
nice to navigate and look at. And I had a little look into their approach. It was obviously they have a legal requirement for all government
Hmm.
websites have to be accessible. So it's good that they do what they're saying. But it wasn't always that way. They get about 5 million visitors a day, and there are over
Wow.
500,000 web pages. And they did a big audit several years ago and found several pages just were not accessible at all. But they were able to categorize them into 3 areas. And I think it's similar for a lot of companies. Certainly for us, there were these 3 main areas. One is technical, and these are issues that your developers really have to fix. There's also content. So this is your content creators. Say
Hmm.
it could be videos missing captions, for instance, or images
Right.
missing alt tags. And there's more complex issues that could be a combination of both. And one thing they did with the technical issues was to centralize all the styling and all the components, like buttons, when I say a component like a button, so that when there's an issue with one, they change it in one place and it's fixed everywhere. And I think that centralized styling and component is really important, and it's something that we've adopted as well.
So how can smaller companies or organizations embrace accessibility, without becoming overwhelmed with all this? I mean, there's a lot that can go into it. So how can smaller organizations get started?
Yeah, well, I mean, you can get outside help as a start. I mean, you can get outside help in the form of audits. That can be expensive and it's not required. I would start with the staff training, because I think that when you see real people with training, and there are a lot of accessibility courses out there, with training you are exposed to some of the real problems that people with disabilities have, and it can be quite motivating to then go and tackle the problems and solve them. So I think that's important. Then I'd start with some quick wins just to get that momentum going and to see the success that you're bringing in and the change. So some of the quick wins could be things like color contrast,
Mhm.
focus indicators, making sure all the content is accessible. Also fix the issues that have the widest impact. So that's something we would focus on as well, is if there's an accessibility issue that's affecting all the end users in our platform as opposed to managers. So the end users, there'll be a much larger number of those, then I think that's a big impact issue that you should focus on first. And also just don't expect it to be fixed overnight. It's an ongoing problem that you just have to keep on top of all the time. It's not like you can just throw everything at it for 3 months, tick it off, and it's done. You need to be thinking about it all the time, because if you're constantly evolving and building new things, it just has to be in that process that you're making sure you're thinking about that every step of the way. So make sure with the staff training that it's your engineering team is on board, your QA team is on board, your product team, your sales, marketing, everyone has to know what's going on and be a part of it.
So true, so true. And just I'll speak up from a marketing standpoint because I'm from the marketing team. Is one of these quick wins is use software that's already done the work for you. So, like our platform is, it's accessible and users can get in there and use it. And that's something, organizations can say, like, we provide this software that is accessible to everyone. Um, so yeah, that goes like just seeing who you partner with and what software and tools you use is really important.
One thing that is actually often forgotten that I've just realized is you can put a lot of effort into your own accessibility fixes and get everything working really well. But if you depend on other tools that haven't put in that effort, it can then make you look bad, because, and you don't, because that's a different tool and a different company, you don't have control over what they're doing. So it really has to be a part of the procurement process.
That's
When
right.
you are investing in other tools, you have to make sure that they're also on board with the accessibility. Otherwise, they undo, the work you've done on your own product.
That's right. And that's, you mentioned the VPAT before,
Mm.
but, like making sure that your software providers have that publicly available, and you sort of do your homework to make sure they actually have what they say they have is important when it comes to accessibility.
Yes, one big procurement decision we had to make was about our editors. And before we decided on which tool to go with, we actually got a blind person with a screen reader. We commissioned them to come and test out various products for us and give us their feedback on which worked best. So, and I think that was quite an important step to take, and
Yes.
definitely something I'd recommend other organizations do.
Yes, it's such a good point. Yeah, it's amazing. Okay, well, now let's look ahead. What's coming? We've got this big legislation coming. What do you think is ahead of us in terms of, overall, like inclusive digital experiences in Europe and beyond? What should we be thinking about?
I think this is a really good step forward. I accessibility rules, and of course the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, have been around for a number of years, but I think a lot of companies have just sort of not really taken them seriously. They've thought, oh, well, we'll maybe do a bit, but possibly they put it in the lower priority bag and haven't given it the consideration that really it has deserved. But I think that's changing, certainly over the last couple of years, and hopefully this new legislation in the EU will really bring it to the forefront and make it a higher priority than it has been, which will be really great, because it means everyone in society can participate and do everything everyone else can do, which is ultimately want. And it's good, as the reason for the European legislation is that it's good for trade, and that ultimately is good for everybody.
It's so true. So true. Thank you, Rachel, so much for answering our questions about accessibility and for being our what we call our accessibility champion at Creative Force. You've brought up a lot of good information here that I think people can use.
It was a pleasure. Thanks very much, Lindsay.